Hi, we're the Crisses, and welcome to Better Spoons, Passion and Presence as a Daily Energy Source by Star, Moonlight, and Dreel. So what if we told you that most people on the planet are running their life on panic energy? And there's a way to change that. That science knows that there's another metabolic energy that exists, but just started exploring the tip of the iceberg around 2011. But the ancient medical practices have known about it for millennia. So, a little bit of a disclaimer. This is one of our areas of geekery uh, and study as a plural autistic system. We have many, but this is one of them. So, while there are a lot of concepts that we're going to discuss in here that are just facts, how we put these various facts together is our own discovery, which we made in around 2010. So we're bringing this to the community because nobody is born with an owner's manual to tell us how to utilize our body's different mechanisms for processing and handling energy and our hormonal system. As traumatized people, we're kind of stuck, if you will, in one type of energy and kind of looping over and over again within a cycle that we could hopefully, with the right information, the right skills, we could hopefully break that cycle and utilize a different type of energy. But this is not simple. So we want to stress that this is a practice and not a cure. It's not a panacea. There are yogis and other gurus and experts who practice mindfulness techniques and some of what I'm talking about today, and they will say they don't always get it right. The Dalai Lama does not always control his thoughts. He makes it a practice. Thich Nhat Hanh, he also talks about how part of the art is noticing, getting caught up in the thoughts and realizing it and making corrections and coming back to center or coming back to mindfulness. Now, this is not a presentation about mindfulness. This is a presentation about better spoons because we're not going to stop at mindfulness, but we are going to take the journey through mindfulness and go to the other side, which I don't think many people and cultures talk about as much. Maybe because on the ableism side of this, once they break the panic cycle, once they break that loop thinking in a downward spiral, once they break that, maybe they more naturally come to the other end of the spectrum, but they're not thinking about people who are habitually stuck in panic mode. This is a practice. It's not a cure. It's not a panacea. It is not a just. This is not simple. Ableist culture pressures people to fix themselves, to come to some magical realization that they're just doing things the wrong way and fix it, as if we all have these tools and as if they're all at hand and they're all easy and it's just a matter of, oh, you're using a screwdriver, you needed a hammer. It's not that easy. So we don't want to seem like we're shaming anyone for living their life one way or another, or even once you have the intellectual information, that we're not saying that you're just going to be able to switch from one thing to another in a day. People practicing these things for decades still have trouble and still need to make course corrections and remind themselves and notice that they're doing things one way and could be doing it another way. And our body is a participant in this process. Our body, it's not just about thoughts. It's not just about the things we can consciously control, which are thoughts. Believe it or not, I know that's another practice, controlling your thoughts. But thoughts can be controlled. Thoughts can be corrected. Thoughts can be redirected. Thoughts can be directed on purpose. But that also is a skill. And so none of this is to say you're going to have an easy time implementing this information or that it's going to just come naturally like riding a bike. This is a practice. It's difficult. It takes building a series of different habits. It's a layering of skills. So there are first steps, but then there's follow-up steps and there's other steps. The journey is worth it to have a larger toolkit, if you will. There are times when we really do need to be in panic mode. We do need panic energy, and it is a part of the human condition that's extremely useful. It's there for a reason. It helps us survive. But there are also times that our endocrine system, our body, really needs a break from living in that type of energy and to regenerate resources, to heal tissue, and to just come out of that frenetic type of energy and live someplace else for a while. And as traumatized persons, and I'm not saying everybody watching this presentation is traumatized, but to really stress for those who are traumatized, because we are the victims of continual ableism in this, to stress that this is not a matter of shame. This is not a matter of pressuring you that you have to use these things. What we do think is necessary is that you have the knowledge that these things exist and how to put them into context in a larger sense, like in life. And when your therapist says something to you about mindfulness, about controlling your thoughts, that you understand why they're saying it and what the benefits are to saying it, rather than it just being a prescription that you run off to some mental pharmacy and try and fill. Why is it that these things work? What is the mechanism behind it? What is it doing to our body? And why is it so important to try doing these things if we want the results that we can get from doing them? So we're hoping that this becomes a practice that you want to try to bring into your life, and that you understand and forgive yourself when it's difficult and it doesn't work right away, or when you fall off the bike, that you get back on and try again, because it is completely, totally in human nature to go through various cycles in terms of our personal energy. Life is challenging and panics will still happen. Anxiety may still be there somewhere, especially for plurals. So person fronting may be practicing this and somebody in the back may be still stuck in panic mode. But hopefully this information helps improve your life in at least some small ways. And like many practices, the more that you do and the more of a habit that you make it, the more you'll get out of it. What are spoons? What is it that the Spoonie community is talking about? And that's to say mainly people that are disabled, but also neurodivergent people. What is it that we're talking about when we talk about spoons? So spoon theory was created by Christine, forgive my pronunciation, Miserandino, in a diner, describing to a friend how chronic pain is debilitating and what it does when you're attempting to emulate being an abled person, when you're trying to handle what able people believe they should be able to do in a normal day, how difficult that is for somebody who is in constant chronic pain. And so she looked around for what was at hand and gathered up spoons from all the nearby tables at the diner and used them to show kind of a token economy, if you will, or to display a transactional issue. And that's how she framed it. So she used these spoons to illustrate her own finite energy or resolve and resilience in her own condition. It has since then been used and become a colloquialism used across many disabilities, chronic illness, and neurodivergent conditions to describe a subjective allotment of energy towards various routines and necessary tasks, and its variance within our life, both on a daily and even hourly basis. So, what is this theory really about? Like, under the surface, other than this desperation in a moment of needing to explain something to a friend in a diner, what is it that spoon theory is really about? So, no matter what the words used to describe it, we each have a limited amount of energy and a limited amount of neurotransmitters ready to be put to use at any given time. People with neurodiversity, disabilities, or chronic conditions may be hyper aware of these limitations since we hit the upper limit of our own energy and resilience more often than able people who don't have those experiences. Unfortunately, spoon theory also falls short in certain ways. It just reduces the variety of bodily systems that are involved in this process to a singular presentation of energy as a whole, and doesn't acknowledge that the source of those spoons matters, that there are panic spoons and passion spoons. So we're going to get back to that later. By extension, there's also fork and knife theory. And these aren't used as often where I think fork theory is borrowing spoons is how it was spoken about in the original spoon theory, but forks is what you borrow when you're quote unquote borrowing spoons. The fork theory is that you're borrowing forks or you're using forks in place of spoons because you ran out of spoons. And then knife theory is what happens when you run out of both spoons and forks. But these are not used as often, so we're going to cover the concepts that they're related to a little bit, but we're going to skip them for now. So our personal story, we were raising 2 kids and running a business in the aftermath of the 2008 housing bubble burst. We were at the time a member of at least 13 different business groups. We were on a couple of board of directors, and committee meetings. We were running meetings, and we had just finished writing our autobiography. So it was late 2009 when we finished writing and publishing our autobiography and handing it out to people who had pre-purchased it and stuff. So we were researching caregiver burnout and how it applies to holistic practitioners in anticipation of writing a book on the topic, because at the time, holistic practitioners were one of our target markets for our business and one of our, one of the communities that we really cared about. So it was going to be a really big, dry, boring book with like a lot of footnotes and resources and an extensive index. So one day after we were compiling all of these notes and writing huge chunks of a first draft for Healer in the Hot Seat, we had a bolt of inspiration. And we ran over to our whiteboard and we started scribbling stuff. And this became the basis of our book, Surrender to Passion, which was really much more self-help than research-oriented. I mean, it was a coalescence of all the information in our heads. So it was intuitive. You take a lot of different information, you fuse it together in a sudden flash of inspiration. So it was intuitive. We developed on our whiteboard in that moment a 9-step plan for going from panic mode, panic energy, to a moment of peace so that you could transition over to passion energy. The book itself is not really amazing. It's It's our mindset in 2010. It reflects our internalized ableism. It's good in its concepts, but not necessarily the best in its language and delivery. But it was about a year ahead of its time. It's because in 2011, people started publishing about mindfulness and it started hitting the news. So after we had drawn some of the charts, the original charts, we just modified them slightly for this presentation, but after we had drawn our charts and run workshops based on our book and talked about how to to reverse your internal engines so that you're running on better spoons. A graph appears labeled Panic Cycle, Adversity is Greater Than Survival. On the left side of the page, there's a big wave. On the right side of the page, that wave subsides into just a small arrow pointing upwards. The vertical axis is labeled Perceived Energy and Motivation. The horizontal axis is labeled Healthiness. The left side of the chart is explained as draining, adrenal hormones, epinephrine, some chemical dependency. The center point of the chart is labeled presence. It's at the baseline near healthiness. As healthiness decreases towards the panic cycle, the line moves through concern, worry, anxiety, fear, and frantic as it escalates in perceived energy and motivation. The line splits in two, going to overwhelm and then dipping to exhaustion and falling all the way down to rock bottom total burnout at the least healthiness. The second line goes to caffeine drugs, escalates, and then falls and heads down to rock bottom and total burnout. From rock bottom and total burnout, there are two lines. One heads back into the panic cycle, labeled relapse. The other one heads back to presence, labeled recovery. At the center of the chart, near healthiness and presence, it says typical yoga and martial arts. As the line continues upward, it heads towards deep yoga prana or martial arts chi practice. So, welcome to the panic cycle as we drew it out in 2010. This cycle explains metabolic energy when you enter into a panic situation, and you can jump into this cycle at any point. But we wanted to show the escalation in how we perceive our personal energy. In our culture, we kind of honor this side of this spectrum. Work, business, caffeine culture, deadlines. We keep people over in this corner and we milk them for everything that they're worth. So our book, Surrender to Passion, was about white collar burnout. So you see a little of that reflected in here. So you start out the day, you're in an okay space, and then you're a little concerned. Maybe you might not make your deadline, and then you're worried you're not going to make your deadline. Now you have anxiety about your deadline. Now you're scared of missing your deadline. Now you're frantically trying to meet your deadline. Now you're pumping some caffeine and drugs into your system so you can maintain this frenetic energy so that you can meet that deadline or at least be as close to it as possible. You know, we might do this in school also. School has some of this tied into it, which I guess prepares people for this awful work cycle. At some point, your system can't handle this level of cortisol and other panic energy running through it, epinephrine, and so on. So you hit a tipping point. Now, either you can backslide down towards the middle of this spectrum, or what some of us do is we continually push ourselves up this hill and push and push and push, and we tip down the other side. So at that point, instead of sliding back toward the middle, you just start to flatline. Your body can no longer take it. You end up overwhelmed, exhausted, and you're sliding down the far end of the spectrum. Okay, you can see that the horizontal axis here is healthiness, because it is a tremendous strain on our body to be at this energy level with these kind of chemicals running through our body. It is what is called in some literature adrenal burnout, because we're running on quote unquote adrenaline, which is now called epinephrine. So it really doesn't have much to do with the adrenal glands, although they're involved, and adrenal burnout has been debunked in and of itself. You know, it's like it's not you're running out of adrenaline. But our nervous system can't run endlessly on this kind of energy. So then you slide down and eventually you hit a flat line. What is that flat line? Rock bottom, total burnout, dark night of the soul. There's all kinds of names for it, but when you flatline, generally speaking, if you're still caught up in whatever it is that caused you to end up down this end of the spectrum, sometimes you flee. So this is where people will rage quit jobs, or they will move halfway across the country, kind of a fugue state, if you will. And if and when somebody recovers, they can spend quite a long time down in total burnout. But if and when they recover, usually they recover on a lower energy trajectory towards the middle. So you can see recovery. But what happens to a lot of people is they get back on the treadmill. So they flatline. Maybe they just veg out for the weekend when they get back from work. And they just get back right into the cycle somewhere. They go back to work on Monday. They're kind of feeling about it. But then, another deadline. More caffeine. Whatever it is. And they get back into this cycle. So it's kind of a hamster wheel of burning yourself out during the week and then crashing over the weekend. So this is the cycle that we were explaining in Surrender to Passion. We didn't put the chart in there, but we already had the chart in hand. We thought about putting it in the book, but didn't want to have to explain it in what was really a self-help book. But we already had these charts. But we're showing it to you because you can also, I'm sure by now, recognize that this cycle exists for people who are in trauma recovery as well. So we want to bring this information to the trauma recovery world and explain these issues and reframe them for people who are dealing with trauma. So here we are, we're caught in this cycle. Some of us live our lives in worry, concern, anxiety. We're on the low energy end of this spectrum. And occasionally something will actually happen and we'll end up in the higher energy. You know, these are survival modes, if you will. And they're completely legitimate. Okay, mind you, totally legitimate. When you're having flashbacks, it's visceral, it's real. Your body is in this mode. It's got these chemicals going through it. This is real. This is not all in your head. This is not imagination. Your body is really coursing chemicals through it that are on this end of the spectrum. This is talking about metabolism. We're talking about hormones, and it's addicting. This cycle in and of itself is addicting without even going to the caffeine and the drugs portion. But sometimes when that level of energy starts topping off and you need more, or maybe you feel yourself slipping down towards burnout, sometimes people grab up the caffeine and pump themselves up even higher, which is why there's that second peak. It was just us trying to describe that in our culture, we also basically pump hormones and chemicals into our body that increase our capacity for perceived energy. Okay. In that case, it's subjective energy. But what are we doing? We're really depleting our body of a lot of resources, B vitamins and so on, that we're really using up reserves. Okay. We're borrowing spoons, if you will, by the colloquial culture way of looking at this. So at some point, we're pushing ourselves beyond our capacity. And we're really risking falling down that other side of of the hill, if you will, into rock bottom and total burnout. So, what is it that our therapist is trying to convince us to do when they ask us to do a breathing exercise, or they want us to do a little mindfulness exercise and look at the things in front of us and talk about our different senses and count and breathe and all these things? What they're trying to do is they're trying to bring us to the middle of the spectrum, what we called peace in our original work, and we changed the word on this diagram to presence. These are presence skills. These are a variety of tools, and there are many of them, not just the ones our therapist tells us about, that we can use to get to the middle of the spectrum. We've got what our culture is kind of aware of on some levels, but we never really explicitly explain or hand a owner manual to people saying, here, this is how to properly use your body. This is left out in our culture. And there are cultures that are more aware of this in some ways, maybe not per our chart. Maybe they don't describe it explicitly and draw a map and show it to people, but they do talk about coming out of this mode and going to a different mode. But there's still like half of this diagram you'll notice is kind of blank. There's half of this story missing. Let's see. And the other thing we wanted to mention is burnout also has other faces and other names that you might think of relating to burnout: flatlining, ego depletion, decision fatigue, adrenal fatigue. So there's different ways of thinking about it. Actually, in terms of plurals, just a moment to look at this. When you have a headmate who crashes and burns and they go to the back somewhere really deep and they disappear for a while, they usually have hit rock bottom. They can no longer sustain whatever it was that they were doing. Something happened that tipped their scales for them and they ended up exhausted, and then they kept going, and then they ended up in burnout. So since people with PTSD and CPTSD end up in this cycle quite frequently on this panic side of the equation, we have a lot of susceptibility to burnout. We live here. This is our normal. We don't get a weekend off, if you will. Where white collar burnout can maybe get, after work, they may go and sit on the yoga mat and meditate for a little while, and they get their break after work, and their limbic system and their central nervous system can come out of panic mode for a little bit, even if they still get back on the hamster wheel when they go back to work the next day. People with PTSD like us, we spend a lot of time in this panic cycle, almost all of our time in this panic cycle. So we've got adrenaline, epinephrine, cortisol, and what we experience because of these depleting issues and draining issues and all the nutrition it drains out of us and B vitamins, and it keeps our immune system either suppressed or it turns into autoimmune diseases where our body starts attacking itself. It plays an enormous role in health crises and disease and chronic illness. And what we're describing here in terms of biology is the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so this end of the cycle is when we're in, what would they call it? Like sympathetic nervous system in overdrive or activation. It's the activation of our sympathetic nervous system. And when we have CPTSD and PTSD, it's activated almost all of the time. Where normally, way back, it would only be activated when we're in danger. And the center of this is presence, and the most relief we can get is presence. And sometimes we can't get there. Sometimes we're so caught up in this that it's very difficult to get to presence. And it takes a lot of learning and a lot of effort to get to a point of presence. It's something that once we recognize how to get there, it gets easier. Like I've given you a map here, right? So once you know what direction presence is in, not in terms of this map, but in terms of your body, when you feel yourself coming down off of that panic energy, when you kind of follow, once you get there, now you'll know how to follow it and get there a little bit easier each time. So it's kind of like you're drawing an internal map. Oh, this worked for me. And then sometimes, your technique, let's say it's mindfulness, let's say it's looking at what's right in front of you. Sometimes it'll stop working. Sometimes your body needs something different. So next time it may be a breathing technique. Next time it may be patting your body down or hugging yourself. It could be eating a delicious food and paying a lot of attention to it, or whatever it is. There's so many different ways to trigger mindfulness and get back towards your center, if you will. There's no one right way. Yoga and martial arts do practice presence a lot. So breathing techniques, prana, is a yoga technique that brings you more towards the middle. In martial arts, you're doing breathing techniques, you're doing physical warm-ups and things like that get you more into your body, more present in the present moment, which is part of presence. So we have different, I guess, typical examples of presence. We're going to fade out some of the panic side to make a point here. An updated chart appears. The vertical axis says perceived energy and motivation. The horizontal axis says healthiness. The left side of the chart says panic, escaping from. The right side of the chart says passion, drawn towards. There is a light purple line dividing the chart in two, and a dot at the baseline in the center of the chart. This dot is labeled presence. The former wave is mostly grayed out, labels removed, but the points on the line and relapse recovery arrows remain, grayed out. The part of the panic line still in black is now a long curved arrow pointing down the slope to the right, passing in the center through presence, then curving back up and pointing off into the distance at the top right of the screen, significantly higher in perceived energy and motivation than the panic side of the chart. On the panic side of the chart, there is a dotted line following this slope down. This line is labeled stop near the peak of the wave, awareness near the middle of the slope, re-enter the here and now near the bottom of the slope, and ends in an arrowhead, pointing to a label near the presence dot called letting go. The passion, or right side of the chart, is described as enjoying, healing, and replenishing, endorphins, love hormones, mental stimulation. There are points along the solid upward slope that are undescribed. There is another dotted line that picks up on the passion side of the chart from presence and follows the solid line, pointing off into the distance. The dotted line has labels at intervals starting at the bottom center of the chart and up to the top right of the chart. They are notice, needs and wants, gratitude, desire, purpose. This is the same chart, that's why it's still there, kind of faded out on the side here. But this is the same chart. How do we escape from panic mode and get to presence? And then what else does that open up to us? So over here on the left, first we have stop. We have to notice that we're in panic mode, and we have to interrupt it, if you will, because panic mode will just keep going. It's the hamster wheel, so it'll just keep going if we don't stop it somehow. So just that moment, that bang, that pop of inspiration, like, oh, I'm in panic mode, that actually is the moment when you can start the reversal of the engines. That's when, if you have a hamster wheel and it's going, say, counterclockwise, there has to be a moment, however brief, that it stops in order to go the other way. So there's that very, very split-second moment, even if it goes straight from one direction to the other, there's a moment in between where it stops. So that's what stop is in here. And stop can last a moment or it can last longer. It's okay. So there may be times that we're in the middle of anxiety and we stop and we go, oh my God, I'm so anxious. And we notice that we're anxious and we're aware of anxious, and we don't get any more anxious in that moment. And maybe we make that moment last a day or a week. Maybe we take our meds and calm it down from there, whatever. But there's that moment where we are at our current peak and we stop, and then we can reverse direction. And we could stop and then keep going, in the same direction as well. But we don't want to do that. So stop is the very first step. And in Surrender to Passion, that was the S in surrender. I changed some of the words here because I'm less ableist now. I've been dealing with my internalized ableism. I've changed some of the words in this diagram. So stopping and then noticing, being aware, is part of coming back down off this hill and backing away from the peak, if you will. We can come down in awareness. Awareness is shifting focus. It's taking our focus off of whatever our thoughts were running away with or our feelings were running away with. And our thoughts and feelings are closely tied to the chemicals underneath. The chemicals give a quality to our thoughts. And our thoughts can lend itself to building those chemicals in our body. This happens in depression. So when you think a depressed thought, your body may release certain hormones. And then because you've just released certain hormones, it may affect the mood or the flavor of your thoughts. And so now maybe you're a tad more depressed. And that'll release more chemicals, which would then influence your thoughts. And it becomes this catch-22. It becomes a cycle. The same thing happens with anxiety. You can work yourself into a frenzy by reacting to the chemicals going through your body. The chemicals give way to various feelings, paranoia, agitation, just feeling like your whole body is vibrating and so on. These things can then also lend themselves to thoughts that further, back up those feelings. We start making things up. We start thinking about the future. We start thinking about the past. We feel guilty. We feel this. We feel that. So we have all these different things where our chemicals are influencing our thoughts and our thoughts are influencing our chemicals. And it's very hard to find a way to break that cycle, to make it stop, to reverse engines, to get out of that ditch. Now notice, my talking about panic mode, I'm not really talking about depression, but I think depression still follows this. I just didn't go into the science and the chemicals of depression at the time because I was looking into burnout and I was looking into specifically caregiver burnout as it would inform holistic practitioners. I didn't dig into the science as much on depression, but I think it's somewhere in here too. And that it may be related, and maybe there's parts of my diagram missing, and hopefully more medically minded and biologically minded people than people with letters after their name and licenses on their wall, will take this kind of information and chase it all down. Regardless, whether it's depression or anxiety, which I think all of this can work for both, you stop and then you can reverse engines. And part of how you can reverse engines is noticing and being aware and making a decision to change it and practicing various ways to re-enter the here and now. That's presence. So somewhere you back down, you get closer and closer to being present. You can continue that direction. You can make choices and use the tools in your toolkit that you learn along the way to get more and more present. And your therapist has a lot of tools for this. There are books on it. There's meditation videos. There's lots and lots of mindfulness and grounding exercises out there, a wide variety of practices. And on top of that, you can look into the mindfulness that's practiced in the totality of Tantra yoga. Tantra is just a bunch of mindfulness arts. Yoga is a physical bending of your body and so on. But there's tantric eating, there's all different kinds of things. So it's all about mindfulness and cherishing your body. We re-enter the here and now. Once we get to the middle, once we are present, it helps to stay present if you let go. You let go of whatever it was that had you running around that hamster wheel or flatlining and so on. Let it go. And again, this is not a just. It's not easy to let go. We're not shaming or judging anyone who can't let it go. If you end up back in the panic cycle, it's okay. It's completely normal. This is human experience. This is all part of, I call it normal. I mean, this is all normal. None of this is like aliens coming from another planet. This is all completely a part of human experience. This is not abnormal anything. I hate the words abnormal psychology because it's not abnormal. So here we are, we let go. But what else is that going to open to us? So now we're at the point where our hamster wheel has stopped spinning. We have stopped it. We are no longer in that mode. We're in the center of the diagram. What else does that open up to us? Because the sympathetic nervous system has a counterpart. And that counterpart is not that peaceful moment of presence. That's not really it. That's kind of a moment of balance. That's kind of a moment of being in the middle. And what our culture fails to recognize and fails to celebrate is the rest of this spectrum. And you'll sometimes see things talking about passion and purpose or gratitude, but nobody's ever explaining how to get from the caffeine culture panic cycle or from, our PTSD nervous system, frenetic panic energy and the cycles of CPTSD and so on. So nobody's telling us how to get from panic over to passion. Everybody is studying and proving by science how getting present is helpful. And this is great. So we got half the diagram. We get down out of panic mode, and there's all these health benefits to getting out of panic mode, and this is wonderful, and we get to presence. But now what? Because we can't live our life in presence. We can't live our life just in the moment. We have to plan ahead. We have to handle what's coming down the pipe. We have to talk about tomorrow. How do we do that in a way that's healthy and can still make progress and still get our projects done and still move our life ahead and forward without hurting ourselves? And that's where the rest of this comes in. This is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the counterpart to living life in the sympathetic nervous system, where one end of this spectrum is panic. When we talk about the parasympathetic nervous system, we're talking about not just peace, but love. We're talking about being driven rather than running away. We're talking about being pulled towards something rather than trying to avoid it. We're talking about the things that you want, the things you desire, the things that you envision that are exciting to you. So we're talking about excitement. We're talking about love and mental stimulation. We're talking about creativity on this end of the spectrum. It's a lot harder to be creative when you are running away from a tiger. You might get creative about hiding, but that's about it, right? So when you're running away from a tiger, which is what our central nervous system is trying to do in the sympathetic nervous system, when you're running away from a tiger, you're not healing, you're not digesting, you're not, it's all slowed down and hampered. Your body is digesting it differently. There's just all kinds of central nervous system issues on the left side of the spectrum. So once we get into presence, we can then open up the gates to heart-centered living. I know that's like so airy-fairy, and sometimes it seems very Pollyanna, but this is actually a part of the human heritage. This type of energy is there. It's available to us, but because at least our body and many of our audience's bodies are wired for panic mode because we don't know anything else. Maybe we've lived there our whole life. We were born in a panic mode because our egg donor was being traumatized while we were in the womb. So we had these hormones going through us before we were born. We were born ready for trouble. We had generalized anxiety. It's like every day, no matter what was going on, we had this low level of anxiety underneath everything. We've done this for 10 years, just gently redirecting ourselves. We would end up in panic, but we would redirect ourselves back to presence and then choose to try and go on the passion end of things. And if what was going on warranted panic, we would end up on the panic side and we would stay there, and we wouldn't really be able to get ourselves up on the passion end of this spectrum because what was real and right in front of us was a problem situation that needed handling. But in other times, we would get out of panic mode and start working on the passion end of the spectrum, noticing what it is that's going on and making choices. The next one is needs and wants, handling the things you need and want, and feeling the want. Okay. Handling needs can be on either side of the spectrum, but wants is a desire. It's something in your heart or in your mind that's attractive to you. You want this thing. It's pulling you towards it. Gratitude, sometimes it's one of the easier ways to get to love feelings is gratitude. So gratitude exercises that your therapist might recommend and so on, it is an attempt to get you into this mode of feeling love. So at this point, you start to actually get some oxytocin flowing through your body. That's the love hormone. It's the bonding hormone. You want to be careful about feeling that hormone with regard to your therapist, but you do want to feel that hormone within your body because it's a signal that you're on this side of the spectrum. So that loving feeling, that's what the whole heart-centered movement, as Pollyanna and ableist as it sounds, is actually trying to purposefully cultivate love hormone in your heart and your body. And it is released by your heart, by your brain, and by your gonads. And other places, I'm sure. But, that's where like the main releases of oxytocin are in various places of your body. So once you get to gratitude and you feel that feeling in your heart, you're actually, the reason you're palpably feeling it is because your body is releasing a hormone. You actually feel hormones when they're being released because it goes to receptors in nearby cells. So you will feel it and your body will start to relax on some level. So gratitude, desire, when you really want something, when you feel like a loving desire for things. So when you get to the top of this chart, you get to purpose. What do I mean by that? I'm not saying that you don't have a purpose in your life until you get here. What I mean is you're running your life on your purpose. Your purpose is driving your life. You go up the side, your gratitude, you have desire. Now you actually have a goal. You have a dream, a project. You have some kind of activism, something that you feel so much in your heart that there's a wrong in the world that you want to fix, or that there's something you so want to see get done in the world that you're going to do it yourself, that you have a drive to get there. That's why it says drawn towards, or I was talking about drive. So you're driven with your purpose. Your purpose doesn't magically manifest when you're here, but it becomes so central in your life that it fuels your life. The reason there's arrows pointing off the screen is because I don't know if there's anything beyond there. I don't know what happens, quote unquote, after you hit this point. As a normal part of life, you backslide, you end up sliding down this. Sometimes something happens and you jump from one side of this diagram to the other and end up from passion mode back into panic mode. and so on. When you have a cause, when you have a people that you really want to help, you have a choice of how to do it. You can do it intellectually, you can do it panic-wise, but you can also do it from your heart, and you can do it with love. And when you generate that kind of a love and compassion for the people that your cause is representing, it helps heal your body. This is the side of the spectrum where you enjoy things and it replenishes health. It lets your body regenerate and heal damage and so on. So it's getting you out of that panic cycle. So there's no just about this. I mean, look, this is a complicated diagram. It is oversimplified, I'm sure. I could probably have medical doctors and so on go, oh, but wait, you forgot about this hormone and that hormone and these things and these other factors and blah, blah, blah. And you oversimplified it. And it's like, well, you know what? You're not handing us a how to use your body better manual in the first place. So my diagram is a start. So other cultures have their... Let me go back to our presentation here. Personal energy systems across other cultures. So other cultures do talk about this. I mean, I don't think they hand people, an owner's manual for their body when they're born either. Sometimes it's their learned folk who harness and hold this information and impart bits and pieces to the general population, or teach them practices that do this without necessarily handing them the why it works. But in science and medicine, we're talking about metabolism, cellular metabolism, the central nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, which is panic mode, parasympathetic nervous system, which is passion mode, and homeostasis, that balance in between the two, that moment in the middle when you achieve some kind of a balance. It's generally called homeostasis. We also see these cycles being described in part or whole in other cultures. So artists, and psychology also studies this because it came to them through artists. Artists talk about flow. Flow is you've released all of that panic and anxiety side, and you're now churning energy and inspiration and creativity on the passion side. Okay, so you're ending up in this mental flow state. In sports, they call it the zone. Okay, again, you've left all the problems behind. The problems are, still in the locker room or whatever, and you're out on the field and you're in the zone. Tiger Woods would also talk about being in the zone. That's how he won tournaments and so on. In Ayurveda and Tantric yoga, there's the concept of prana, which is breath or wind, but it's also cultivated into a whole discipline of yoga, a sub-discipline of yoga, if you will, called pranayama yoga. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. Loosely, it's energy, soul, breath, wind, and it permeates all things. Prana is energy. And so that's like simplifying it and putting it into Western concepts, of course. And pranayama yoga is the discipline of working with your breath. In terms of this presentation, this is a discipline of controlling your energy flow by using your breath. And to quote the small section of the Wikipedia article, in Ayurveda and therapeutic yoga, pranayama is utilized for many tasks, including to affect mood and aid in digestion. A.G. Mohan stated that the physical goals of pranayama may be to recover from illness or the maintenance of health, while its mental goals are, quote unquote, to remove mental disturbances and make the mind focused for meditation. All of Tantra Yoga includes different disciplines for expanding your body's capacity for directing its own energy flow or prana, but pranayama is the specific discipline of using breath work to control energy flow. So, you could hear there were keywords in there that go right back to central nervous system issues in Western thought. Better digestion, removing mental disturbance, making the mind focused. So using breath to come down out of panic mode and get to presence. Classical Chinese medicine. So we're going to go back to our own rudimentary understanding of what we learned through our herbalism classes and just brief touches on classical Chinese medicine in our understanding, which may or may not be correct. But in summary, you have qi energy, which is daily energy. It's your spoons, if you will. You have Jing energy, which is your lifetime energy. And depletion of Jing would be borrowing spoons, or knife theory, okay, is borrowing spoons from your life, depleting your total energy. And then there's Shen, as we understand it, is emotional or spiritual energy. And the documentation on these in English are pretty thin. And it's very difficult to research because the word Jing is also used for all Chinese medical documentation. So it's very difficult to track down the specifics on this in English for me in preparation for this presentation. I'm sure I could if I tried harder and had more time. And then there's core shamanism as taught by the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, Michael Harner's work. As an anthropologist, he pulled from many different indigenous cultures and neo-shamanic practitioners, not indigenous folk, drew this concept from many indigenous cultures and looked for the common threads, and they found common threads about how trauma impacts overall health and immune disease and immune function, and basically made a bunch of teachings in neo-shamanism regarding this. So the shamanic quote-unquote soul is very similar to the Chinese concept of Jing energy. And when you have trauma, you lose a portion of this energy. And if you lose too much of this energy, you experience disease, and your health goes down and you may die. So in that concept, if you lose enough of this life energy, this soul loss, if you lose enough of it, you may end up very sick. So that is the observations in core shamanism. Where does Western society fall short in practice of all of this? In school, in biology classes, we're taught about the central nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. They talk about homeostasis. And all along, the implication is that we experience these things and they're normal reactions to external stress and events. But we're not actually taught how to use it on purpose. In other cultures, they've already spent thousands of years studying how to influence our metabolism on purpose. So there are folks who are aware and try to teach it to people, even across cultures. We have dojos, we have ashrams, and so on. But it doesn't make it out to mainstream culture until it gets a stamp of approval from science. So science is lagging thousands of years. Science is also very busy breaking apart each individual portion of this cycle, if you will, to be able to study the individual effect of each discrete part of the bigger picture, which ends up being studied usually in a very impractical, sterile field that's devoid of real life context. So this really holds science back in terms of both usefulness and application of this. So if anybody is out there going, but science, and why didn't we learn this in science, and blah, blah, blah. This is why. We're too busy breaking everything down into its parts. We're not looking at the whole. Holism is not a part of science. Holism is part of holistic culture. And overall, science shuns anything that might seem woo. Or they'll claim it's woo because they don't understand it. So anything is magic if you don't understand it. Science has a lot of hang-ups about things being quote-unquote magic. There's plenty of science about topics that make mainstream science and medicine uncomfortable. But as a rule, these theories, even though proven, are still considered fringe and shunned. This includes theories of consciousness and mind, both things that can't be directly observed. So when we use science, We use objectivity as the most important thing, and that puts mental health on a back burner automatically. We've also decided that mind over body is a little too woo somewhere along the way, even though there's plenty of science to back it up. From the placebo effect, for example, which is definitely mind over body, through the effects that we're discussing today in being able to influence and control our central nervous system function and our metabolism. It takes a long time to prove each tiny little discrete piece of this puzzle. So even when somebody has a breakthrough, they have to write it up, publish it, wait for others to repeat their experiments and verify them. And this is great for scientific curiosity. But when a practice is safe and it's been widely used for thousands of years by millions of people, it's still safe whether or not science has studied it. It doesn't always need the Western science seal of approval to be effective. So science finally figured out that mindfulness and meditation are effective in 2011. Maybe another 50 or 100 years down the road, it'll get to the rest of this bigger picture about human metabolism, and then to actually recommending it for public use. But I'm not sure about y'all. I can't wait that long for them to catch up. They're starting to teach mindfulness in schools. They say it lowers anxiety and improves focus, but they don't bring it back to the central nervous system and cellular metabolism and extrapolate where they can go from there. Also, it would be helpful if they studied the parallel concepts in different cultures and look for overlaps across cultures to uncover ways to help improve people's lives with this knowledge. Sometimes science is just in it for itself. It studies things, gathers knowledge, but never figures out practical applications for the science it uncovers. They look for the next experiment, the next theory to prove, and they lose the possibilities in what has already been discovered. No one's pulling the pieces together. The science is already there. It's in most biology books when they talk about cellular metabolism, body metabolism, the central nervous system, and homeostasis. But what they don't do is go the next step into how we can use that information to make practical changes in our life and choose, or at least assist our body in choosing a different source of energy. They got as far as mindfulness and then got hung up researching something that ancient medicine practitioners across the world have known for thousands of years. But to our knowledge, no one followed the idea to the real treasure underneath it. We can choose to live engaged with our parasympathetic nervous system more often. This goes against the whole idea of a caffeine-fueled culture of deadlines and distress caused by how our workforce and our culture operates. Maybe the average doctor or scientist has a happy life and lives in the parasympathetic nervous system more often, which would make this all ableist, right? Although we doubt it because that's just not how our culture in the US operates. So regardless, members of this audience who may have DID and CPTSD, we do, and we can tell you it doesn't come naturally for us. Changing this scenario, moving from one energy to the other, is not natural. If we weren't making a conscious habit out of this, it still would not come naturally. So what's our dream about this? Why are we bringing this information to people? So what we would love to see are acknowledgement that this exists and that it's within our ability to choose it, even if it's difficult, and for people to research it more and develop more trainings on how to become aware of what type of spoons we're using and the myriad ways we can choose better spoons so we can make a habit of it. Our society is just barely scratching the surface on recognizing and teaching presence. It would be great to get to the point of teaching passion and deliberate heart-centered living as well, and to do so knowing that we're changing where we get our spoons. Another thing we would like to see is building up a Westerner discipline and habits around this information, something that's not appropriative but is still effective. A legacy that we can teach to school children and perhaps create a movement of people living with healthier energy and getting our whole society out of panic mode. We're going to say it again. We keep saying this over and over again because this information has been used as a hammer to beat on people with disability. That's why we keep saying this over and over again. This is not easy. This is not simple. Able people may live more on that end of the spectrum. Maybe that's why it seems like they have infinite spoons. We don't know because we're not able. So we can't tell you what they're living in. They'll have to tell us. So we've spent 10 years purposefully choosing to live in this passion energy. Ever since we wrote that book and we had our epiphany, we've been choosing to live in passion energy as much as we can. It's not easy. It's not just. We fall off the bicycle. This is a practice. Just like meditation's a practice, mindfulness is a practice. These are all a practice. And taking our energy to the other end of the spectrum as much as we can so that we have another option for re-engaging with the world after we ground in our present. So we take our little time out in the middle and then we say, how are we going to go back out into the world? What are we going to use for our energy when we go back out there? So we can say from our own experience that some of the folk in your system will find this information much easier to put into practice than others. You can choose whether you want to take up these ideas and attempt to make it into a discipline and build the habits. At the same time, I would not say this is hard either. It's challenging to break habits and make new ones, and this can be made into a habit. When our body has been running on panic energy for most of our lives, and some of us since we were in the womb, this natural state may be a mystery to us. We fought through chronic and generalized anxiety and CPTSD issues to find this state and managed to do a reasonable job of holding it onto this state on and off. Okay, definitely had our moments of not being in this state as well, but of being able to get back on the bike, if you will, for 10 years. And right now, we're in a global pandemic, blah, blah, blah. We just moved from 3 years of being homeless and so on. We need a tune-up. We need to remind ourselves of this. We need to get back into the habit. We had 3 years of being homeless. We finally got housing just before the pandemic hit. We've had to deal with bed bugs in the house and so on. So we can say we would have started out in our current troubles in the beginning of this pandemic in a much worse place if it weren't for years of working on building the habits of using passion energy as much as we could. It gave our nervous system a very much needed break. It helped us handle long bouts of anxiety and re-traumatization during homelessness from a better starting point. So great habits include frequent reminders to stop and check in and make sure you're still feeling the difference and engaging with passion energy, or noticing you're not and making a course correction. And anytime you need to center and get present, whether you're on whatever side of the spectrum, doesn't matter. You can stop and get present and then deliberately re-choose to be on the passion end of the spectrum. Life is full of panic-worthy challenges, and we're likely talking to a lot of people with triggers. So if you're like us, you've most likely lived most, if not all of your life on the panic end of the energy spectrum. So we're going to gravitate back to it, whether it's because of something external, force of habit, a trigger, whatever it is, we will end up starting that spiral of panic energy again because life happens. And so the idea is not to feel bad about it, not to feel guilty that you fell off the bicycle, if you will, or you're back in the hamster wheel. Don't feel bad about it because that is counterproductive and it keeps you on that side of the spectrum. Just be thankful that you noticed. Be grateful that you noticed, that you were able to stop, that you were able to even realize that you were in panic mode, because already that's a difference between yesterday and today. It's already an amazing thing to be cognizant and be self-aware. So you can feel gratitude for that. You can be thankful that you noticed. And compassionate with yourself. These are two love feelings. We're always talking about being compassionate with headmates. There's a reason. because a love feeling towards your headmates is much better than an anger feeling or a hatred feeling or a fear feeling. We want you to feel a love feeling towards them because it's moving you towards the other end of the spectrum. So be thankful that you noticed. That's already an amazing thing that you should feel proud of and feel better about. We aren't trained in Western culture to notice panic versus passion energy. So we can be grateful for any time that we spend in passion energy and be thankful that we have the knowledge to change it, that we have this information, that we have some idea of what's going on, and being compassionate with ourselves. Stopping the panic cycle as soon as you realize that you're back in it is a goal. That in and of itself is a laudable, wonderful goal, to just notice and stop. Even if that's all you get to do, just give yourself even a momentary break of it getting worse. And then you can listen to your therapist, or you can work on these things on your own with self-help materials. There is plenty of meditation materials, grounding exercises, mindfulness stuff. There are YouTubes on it and so on. So do what you can to get grounded and present again, and then see what you can do about the conscious choice to re-engage with life with passion energy. There are a lot of benefits to passion energy. For example, resilience and bouncing back from bad experiences quicker. You recover your spoons faster. Also feels like you have more energy and it costs less to do things, so you use less spoons. It gives your endocrine system, your nervous system, a break from cortisol. It leads to better digestion and healing factors. Even if you have problems, it's still going to be better than where you started out. How do we move from panic to passion? We have that role of that pause in the cycle we've been talking about throughout the presentation. Getting to that peace moment so that you can reverse your engines and go back to the other side. Our body lives in the present. Guilt and depression live in the past. Anxiety lives in the future. So you can pick where you want to live carefully. Life only exists in the present tense. Everything else is either memory or imagination. None of us have a crystal ball that's accurate. We all look in our crystal ball and we see what we think is about to happen. We try to anticipate what we think is about to happen. And if we are looking into the crystal ball and we see something bad, we're going to have anxiety. But it doesn't mean that that's what comes to pass. Although sometimes when we feel that anxiety, we make what we fear happen. So we're constantly struggling with this issue ourselves. We're in this and we've researched this and we've had this epiphany, and we are still struggling with getting out of the panic mode, back to presence, and then into the passion mode right now, today. We're struggling with it. A lot has happened in the past couple of months that has completely upended our life, and so we struggle with this issue. So this is as much a reminder to everyone in our system as well as people outside. We've got to get back into the present and into our body and figure out what works for us so we can get into the here and now and then move on from there. Here are some known ways of getting present, or presence skills, if you will. Anchoring, you can carry something with you to help you stay present, a crystal, a worry stone. So we've got grounding, mindfulness, meditation, concentration, anchoring. Sensory lock is what we're calling proprioception, brushing, pressure, getting hugs, like hugging a stuffy or hugging yourself, or somatic cues like chewing or pacing. These are different ways that you can get more present. Awareness and choice. If we have a habit of using panic energy, we don't habitually switch to using passion energy. We habitually switch from grounding and presence back into panic energy. So in order to switch, once you put that pause on your panic, you need to be fully aware that you're present and make a choice. Sometimes making a choice over and over and over again of choosing passion rather than panic. How do we develop passion? So we talked about some of these. How do you fan those flames so that your heart chakra is on fire, if you will, with love, even starting with a little spark. So gratitude, heart-centered thinking and feeling, choosing love, digging for a purposeful why. Why do you want to do that? Find something that really feels like it's pulling you towards it rather than running away from something bad, like consequences of not doing it. Find the reason you really want to do it. And there's an exercise in Andrew Harvey's book, The Hope, and some of his lectures online. He's a Christian mystic. He has an exercise on finding your one true cause, your heart-centered cause, if you will, the one thing in the world that really bugs you the most that you can solve. We'll talk about that more. Passion and spirituality. Humans are more than blood and bones and brain. We have emotions, we have dreams and desires. There's more to us than physical dimensions. So, talking about this without any religious trappings, we have a basic human need to be spiritually healthy, to be in good spirits, if you will, to have a general sense of well-being, to be able to allow ourselves to feel and experience the connections that we have with other critters and people on the planet. Empathy, compassion, gratitude, and love come from a place that's a blend of emotional and spiritual. They're acknowledgments of the interdependence of people in ways that are not purely physical. So you don't have to use this information in any way other than purely physical. The issue is that when we feel emotions, we are feeling to some degree the results of chemicals and hormones coursing through our body. But what we feel is not the sum total of the chemicals at play. There's an interplay between the emotions and the chemicals. The thoughts and awareness are not just synapses in the brain firing. It goes beyond that to consciousness or mind. There's a synergy that goes on that is beyond simply what science can explain with biology. The same goes for our emotional and spiritual awareness. It's more than just the biology that runs underneath it. However, they interact with each other. So by focusing on the feelings of gratitude and calling up thoughts to help you focus the feelings, you can switch your body chemistry from self-centered survival to other-centered altruism. This is where passion lives, in the space between entities. Passion and love-centered emotions aren't just about yourself, although you can certainly trigger them by feelings for yourself as well. However, this is where we cross from biology to emotions to spirituality. This idea that there is connections between people that transcend simple biological needs. This idea that there's connections between people that go beyond simple biological needs invites ideas around the importance of connectedness and the benefits of connectedness to everyone involved. So this is where we start to see that resources don't have to be a scarcity model, and that energy and focus don't need to be hoarded for us to be at our most effective. When we're in panic mode, and these connections are severely hampered and cloudy, it's very hard to be in touch with loving feelings when you're in fear for your life. Our energy pulls inward. It becomes more limited, more difficult to regenerate. It's like it becomes more stagnant. It no longer circulates outside of our own energy field. At the same time, when you're overcome with your love for another, when you're fully engaged in passion mode, it's very difficult to feel your fear. You're much more likely to be excited. The energy can be refreshed and renewed outside of our energy field. We're more open to accepting more energy from outside of ourselves, and we're reaching deeper into ourselves for sources of energy. And that's about all we want to say about spirituality, other than if you have a spiritual practice, you can leverage your spirituality to help you engage with passion mode. And if you're not opposed to having a spiritual practice or engaging in a spiritual practice, we might recommend some at the end of the session. So, to wrap up the presentation, we have some resources. We will put some links in the description. So we can definitely recommend Andrew Harvey's The Hope if you like reading about spiritual, sacred activism is what he calls it, which is not a religion. It's finding your one true cause. the one thing in the world that really bothers you the most, so that you can take it to the streets, if you will, to act globally, to think globally but act locally on your one cause. Find things in your local area that you can change and be effectively making change. And if everybody across the planet did that, the world would be a better place. That's the idea of sacred activism in a nutshell. Thank you for joining us, and we are so excited to impart some of this information, and we're excited to hear how people use it if they can. We've been doing it for 10 years, but it took us 40 years to get there, you know? This is not easy. It is not apparent, and we just hope to bring this to people before they're 40 years old, or before another 40 years goes by. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you.